Hey everyone, I'm John Lynn, the founder of Swaay.Health. We're excited to bring you another in our series of interviews with top leaders in healthcare marketing. And our guest today is Lizzy Feliciano. She's CMO at H1. Welcome, Lizzy.
Hi, thank you for having me. I am so excited to be here.
Yeah, excited to feature you. We always love featuring our Swaay.Health Award winners, so we're going to talk about that. But before we get to it, tell us a little bit about yourself and H1.
Happy to. So, I've been in healthcare marketing for 27 plus years now. It's very much a passion for me. My husband was in nursing for years. And the way I look at it, healthcare has so much potential, but it has always struggled with pulling data and analytics together in a meaningful way. And when I joined H1 now 2 years ago, I was really compelled by its mission to connect the world with great doctors. What that means is we basically amass just so much big data regarding healthcare professionals around the world with the hopes of helping stakeholders as well as patients sort of find out who the best doctors are for clinical trials or to treat certain conditions. We want to understand healthcare professionals not only within their clinical world, but their spheres of influence. How are they using social media? It's a really interesting perspective. And today we're working with over 200 customers, primarily in the life sciences space, but we're really excited about what we've been able to accomplish to date.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to learn more about, how you approach your marketing efforts. I think we're all storytellers, but you have an interesting story because H1 has so much data, and the data tells an interesting story. So I'm excited to learn more about that. But as I mentioned, you won a Swaay.Health Award for Website of the Year. Congratulations to you and
Thank
your
you.
team. Talk to us about that project and maybe some of the challenges and what made it successful.
Yeah, that was interesting. So I had just joined, and there was a lot of excitement building Heritage about marketing, what marketing could do to really sort of propel us into this growth phase of the business. And when I joined, what became really evident is we needed a bridge to take us from truly being a startup to being a organization that was very serious about its mission. And the journey started with us just stepping back and talking to the leadership, talking to our clients, and really mapping out what our story should be now that we were entering into this new growth phase. Once we sort of mapped out that story, it really became, what do we want this website to be? We know that it's sort of our digital front door. We know that we want to draw people there, not only to educate them, but to really help sort of influence, right, the decisions that they're making when they're looking to purchase solutions like H1. And we wanted to take the experience to heart. So it was a lot of planning and mapping and like thoughtful process that went into it. And then I have to tell you what really was phenomenal for me in that journey was identifying some partners that could really help bring that to life. We happened to partner with Atomic Health. We also partnered with a group called Scratch Marketing and Media, and they were just phenomenal partners, primarily because they're specializing in healthcare. So there was, I was taught, we were talking the same language, which
Mhm.
always helps. And they were able to take sort of this vision that I had, I should say, for the website and bring it to life. A lot of iterating with stakeholders. For me, it was critical that I educate internal stakeholders as to what it was that we wanted this new site to accomplish. And during that same time, we were building a new visual identity. So it was super exciting because we could actually see sort of these visual graphic elements come to life and help us tell the story. And we were so excited with the final outcome. And of course, winning the award was just the icing on the cake. So all in all, it was great. The biggest challenge was probably timing. As in most organizations, everything, you want everything yesterday, right? Get it done in a quarter. We need it next month. And so I think the interesting thing for me was figuring out how to not elongate the process, but not take shortcuts that could ultimately affect the integrity of the project. So I'm really glad with where we landed. I have a great internal team and a lot of support. And then of course the groups that I work with externally were just phenomenal. So yeah, here we are.
That's great. I think it's interesting your point about working with someone who knows healthcare, because healthcare is a bit of a different beast. And then also being able to iterate until it is that perfect product, if you will. Is a website ever perfect? I guess is the interesting question. But Atomic Health are the pixel perfect company in my view. They love
Yeah,
it every pixel to be just right.
yeah.
So I think finding that balance is interesting, and having someone who understands healthcare, and that this has to be right, otherwise you burn your bridges with them. Is that kind of what you experienced as you tried to perfect the website, if you will?
100%. I mean, I think we all fall from time to time into this bucket where we've, at least for myself, it's 27 years doing this in the same space, HIT data. I work with some amazing internal subject matter experts. And so you can kind of come to the table thinking that you know it all. I know exactly how we should phrase this. I know exactly how people want to navigate, right, loads of content. And I think what's beautiful about collaborating with other people that have been in the same space, but maybe taken a different journey, is that they're able to push back and help you think about things a little differently. And I think we saw that several times throughout the process where I would come to the table with a very clear idea of how I wanted users to navigate, how we wanted to categorize content, how we wanted visuals to be added to certain pages. And it was just comforting to know that I had someone that understood the nuances of healthcare. There's privacy issues, there's data issues, there's probably the biggest issue is that there's so many health technology companies in the space. And the fact that we all want to sound different and look different, but that's really hard to do. And so having someone on the other side of the table that can push back a little bit and sort of bring different perspectives to the table to help me refine, right? I knew it would never be perfect,
Yeah.
but I just wanted it to be the best that it could be. And I really think that that's what we accomplished together.
Yeah, a website's never done, right? It's
Never,
just
never.
the reality. But talk to us about it. I mean, it's interesting. A website bridges a lot of different areas of marketing efforts, but as CMO, how do you balance investments in something like brand versus
Mm,
demand? I mean, it's one of the core Swaay.Health questions that everyone says, well, how much should I spend on brand versus demand as a marketing leader?
yeah, that's the $1 million question. And my approach has been like, try not to make those two separate conversations because
Hmm.
I think they are so interrelated. When I think about building a brand and I'm thinking, okay, my brand is my story, it's my visual identity, it's the value propositions. Well, all of that is critical to having a strong demand gen program. And the reality is, if you do demand gen right, then you're also building brand. So to think about them as separate investments, I think is probably, not the most effective way to do things. So I look at it as you really need to, one, be honest about where you are as a business, right? Do you have any familiarity? Is there any equity in who you are today? Sort of prioritize what needs to happen. If the number one priority is building equity in your name and like educating the market, conditioning the market to a certain perspective, well, then you may need to turn that lever up a little bit. But when you turn the demand gen, you want to make sure that that story is right, carrying through. And that demand gen really becomes effective when that story is then conveyed through the right channels. And they both have to work together. So I'm not the type of CMO that's going to say, 60% of my budget is going to be on demand gen and the remainder on brand, because I do think that there's so much overlap between the two, and it's just being able to analyze what you're doing consistently and being able to turn that lever according to where you are as a company, where your buyers are in terms of how they're approaching their buying decisions, and how the story that you're trying to tell is evolving over
Yeah. Well, and I guess that evolves over time as well.
time. Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's a question of, is this a long range or is it a short range, right? And what has
100%.
the strategic vision of the company been, and how do I need to satisfy it? It's interesting.
Absolutely.
Talk to us. What are some of the common mistakes that companies make when it comes to kind of building these marketing functions, right? I think you gave us a nice vision, which is branding can be embedded in your demand, right? Like
Mhm.
they don't have to be separate and they should be synergistic. I like that. Any other common mistakes?
Yeah, there's so many. So I probably would say the number one mistake when building a marketing function is to consider it a soft skill or more of an administrative function. I think marketing has evolved so much since I started in this space. And it really has become or can become a revenue center for a business. And so the first thing is I just encourage business leaders to, when you're thinking about marketing, don't think about it as sort of a administrative function that's just there to build materials, assets, collateral, put together a trade show. Because marketing is now sitting on so much data that can really sway revenue one way or another. And so that's mistake number one, is just sort of approaching it with the wrong mindset. Number two is probably just thinking tactically. Over the course of my career, I've sat through interviews where it's like, well, what do you think about advertising on YouTube? And I'm like, I can't think anything about it until you explain to me why would we be considering that. So I think, marketing, you have to think about it from a strategic standpoint. You mentioned long-term, short-term, what's the goal from day one, and how long do we have to achieve it? And then what are the levers that marketing can play to help us get there? And then the third mistake that I think is just underinvestment. Consistently, every organization, that I talk to, kind of instinctively knows that they're not investing at the right levels in marketing, but still struggle to make the business case. And what I can say is, if you look at the data, the reality is by just making small incremental investments over time can really yield some pretty significant lift from a pipeline perspective. So I think make sure that you're thinking about it strategically. Make sure that you're positioning it in the organization as a more strategic pillar, a rev center versus an administrative function. And then just make sure that you're carefully thinking about your investments.
Love it. I mean, that's so practical, and what an interesting perspective. Because you're right. I think a lot of people treat it as a utility as opposed to a profit center, a revenue center. Interesting.
Right.
One of the other common challenges we hear is Swaay.Health community. They always love when we do sessions at our conference, is really having marketing and sales collaborate together, and kind of this divide, if you will, in many organizations between marketing and sales. What have you found are the keys to bridging that gap between marketing and sales?
Data.
Data.
Hands down, data. I mean, the interpersonal relationships between leaders, super important, but that aside, I think data is really what bridges the gap. And the reason is marketing, again, we're usually so busy and we're just firing off campaigns through different channels, and we're looking at engagement rates and open rates and win rates and conversion rates. And oftentimes we just keep that to ourselves. But when you can come to the table with your sales leaders and help them understand how their prospects, their customers are engaging with us as a brand, are engaging with different channels that we're investing in, it changes the conversation. And too often we report from the perspective of justifying what it is that marketing is doing versus educating sales on how we could partner better to get different results. So for me, my team is incredibly strong in that data analytics space in terms of looking at what we're doing and pulling out those nuggets to be able to share. So that's one thing. I think the other thing is from the top down, right? It's really important that anytime an organization is having those strategic annual planning sessions, marketing and sales needs to be at the table discussing the ARR targets. Are there adjacent markets that we want to explore? And making sure that those conversations don't happen in silos. I think if you can include both parties in those very top line conversations, and then if marketing can get comfortable with looking at their efforts and pulling that data to tell a story that helps sales understand sort of the value that's being brought to the table, it goes a long way. And attribution is a real thing. I know that that's a big word in marketing.
It's a challenging thing.
It's a challenging thing, right? But what I've done is I think I try to shift how we think about attribution. It's less about getting credit for what's happening, and it's more about informing better investment decisions. So, a lot of the tension between sales and marketing is like, is that a marketing lead? Is that a sales lead, right? Did they generate it? Did we build a pipeline? And I think the conversation just needs to shift from there. It's more about, let's really look at what our investments are bringing to the table so we can make better decisions going forward.
Yeah, it's interesting. And at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter, because both people probably touch it.
That's right.
It's not about percentage. It's the both contributed to the end goal, which was the sell. So
Absolutely. Absolutely.
interesting. Are there any marketing trends or topics, technologies, platforms? There's so much happening in this, especially in the tech, digital marketing, et cetera, realm, influencer, et cetera. Is there any of those things you're keeping an eye on right now that you think you're going to add to your mix?
I don't know that I'm going to add it to the mix, but I think something that's just running rampant right now is, the whole use of AI, conversational AI, Gen AI. Marketers can use AI to help them write an email or write content. And I was playing around with some of those models not too long ago, and I realized just how predictable the output was. And it just dawned on me that if that's a technology that is, I'll take it a step back. I remember when messaging was a group of, subject matter experts and customers in a room whiteboarding and, culling through competitor websites and looking at collateral spread across the table and really doing the work to understand how our company differentiated from everything that was out there. Well, these models are learning by everyone inputting and asking the same questions. And I feel like we run the risk of potentially losing our ability to differentiate if we start leaning too heavily on the ease of use of AI, right? Like, I don't want an AI bot to write my mission statement or the copy for my website. Chances are I'm going to find it on 100 other websites. So I think for me, I'm keeping my eye on it just because I think it's going to be interesting to see how it influences the way companies are represented through their materials and their messaging.
You almost describe it as an opportunity to differentiate yourself when you don't use it, right? That's what it
I
sounded
believe
like to
that to
me.
be true. I mean, I just think there's nothing more meaningful than like having real conversations with real customers, hearing how they express, right, their needs and their pains and the reasons why they use your service or your technology, and sort of independent thinking. I think that's the best way to sum it up. Is I think as marketers, we don't want to lose that independent thinking, because we can end up, you know, negatively affecting like our ability to tell a unique and differentiated story.
Interesting. I saw someone tweet this today. I think, it was from a little different perspective, and I won't quote it quite right, but they basically said that one of the things that I think they apply to startup founders, but I think we could apply it to marketers, is that too many of us think that our product deserves to be bought at that price, rather than understanding why they should spend the money on our product, right? And so, we've almost told ourselves a story that it's worthwhile, rather than understanding what would make it so that they want to spend that money. Anyway, when I read that, it's kind of what you're talking about, right? That it's just cookie cutter, everyone's doing it, let me market,
I
versus really
remember
understanding what moves the needle for them to spend their hard-earned money.
100%. I remember, 20 years ago going to HIMSS and walking, those 3 football fields of exhibitions and just thinking, my goodness, every booth is saying the same exact, the same thing, patient outcomes, claims data. It was just so repetitive. And as a buyer, I could only imagine how overwhelming it is, right? Buyers, I think, are less worried about missing out. I think they're more worried about messing up in their decision. So if I'm faced, with making a decision and all 3 companies are using the same exact storyline and value propositions, which one am I willing to bet my job on? And I think that's where marketing can really make a difference, in partnering not only with their internal stakeholders, but really kind of creating those connections with customers. how are you using my product and my, what is the greatest value? And what they tell you might surprise you because it might look different than the story that we've been telling ourselves, right? But again, that's marketing's job, is to kind of get under the hood and figure out what the truth is, because there's, underneath all of that common language, there is truth. But so often we're so busy that we just don't have the time to get to it. And I think we're just coming to a place now where it's more important than ever.
Yeah. And you're right. I said it at Hims and Vive that every company became an AI company that solves burnout. So
Overnight.
I saw exactly what you described. Well, Lizzy, this is amazing. You're really brilliant, and you obviously have a lot of experience in executing this well. So I appreciate you taking time to share
Thank you
your
for
insights
having
and
me.
perspectives. And thanks
Thank you so
everyone
much.
for watching and listening. If you want to find more great healthcare marketing content like this, be sure to check it out at Swaay.Health or search for the Swaay.Health podcast. Thanks, Lizzy.
Thank you.